Hi, my name is Brielle. I came home without warning and found my mother shivering outside on the porch in 30-degree weather. She'd been sitting there for 6 hours. Why? Because she ate a bowl of rice without asking my sister-in-law. They said it was just a misunderstanding. They said she liked the couch better than her own room, that she didn't mind eating last, that she was lucky to have a roof over her head. But what if the truth is, they'd slowly pushed her out, piece by piece, until the only place left for her was the cold? And what would you do if you realized your own family had turned your mother into a stranger in her own home? Would you stay silent? Or burn it all down? End with a pause. Leave them wondering. I wasn't supposed to be there. The trip to Dallas had been canceled last minute, and I had every reason to stay home, catch up on client reports, maybe even indulge in an uninterrupted weekend of silence. But something inside me, something deep and unsettled, told me to go. Not next week, not tomorrow, that night. I didn't call ahead, no texts, no voice notes, just drove. The roads to Rochester were familiar, etched into my memory from years of back and forth. But that night, they felt heavier, like the trees knew something I didn't. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sky had shifted from dusty blue to that grayish tint that comes right before snowfall. The house stood just as I remembered, painted the same muted cream, porch light flickering slightly. But something was off. At first, I thought it was a pile of blankets left outside. Maybe laundry someone forgot to bring in. Then the pile moved. I slammed the car door and ran. "Mom?" She didn't look up immediately. She was curled on the concrete steps, her shawl pulled tight over her frame, face pale, eyes closed. "Mom!" I dropped to my knees. "What the hell? Mom, what's going on?" Her eyes fluttered open, red-rimmed and exhausted. "Brielle?" Her voice cracked. "You're here." I wrapped my coat around her before she could say another word. Her hands were like ice, her lips trembling. "Why are you out here? How long have you been sitting like this?" She didn't answer, not directly, just whispered. "I went to the kitchen. I was hungry. Vera said I shouldn't take food without asking." I stared at her. She told me to wait outside until she cooled off, said I was being disrespectful. 6 hours. That's what the clock on the dashboard had said when I pulled in. It was nearly 9 p.m. February in Minnesota, and she was outside. "I didn't want to cause trouble," she said quickly, like I might get upset at her instead. She was upset. I needed air. I thought it'd be good to step outside. That's the thing about my mother. Eleanor never liked conflict. She'd sooner collapse in silence than raise her voice. I helped her up slowly. Her joints creaked with stiffness. Every step inside was agony, not just because of the cold, but because she didn't even flinch when she passed the threshold like it wasn't hers to enter. The house was warm, not cozy, not comforting, just warm. Music played softly in the background, the kind Vera liked. Trendy, light pop. The living room smelled faintly of eucalyptus and some overpriced candle I knew she ordered online. Vera sat on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling with the kind of indifference only people with power learn to master. She didn't look surprised to see me. "You're back early," she said flatly, not bothering to stand. I didn't answer. I guided my mother to the armchair, took the throw blanket folded neatly on the ottoman, likely for decorative purposes, and wrapped it around her legs. "She's freezing," I finally said, voice lower than I expected it to be. Vera shrugged. "She went outside." I figured she needed space. "You sent her outside," I corrected. "She got into the rice. I'd made dinner for me and Alaric. She knows not to touch anything without checking first. I told her that, multiple times." I didn't trust myself to speak yet. I looked at my mother. She was quiet, eyes cast downward. "She wasn't starving," Vera added, without looking up from her phone. "She's just used to doing whatever she wants. This is my house now, Brielle. There are boundaries." I nearly laughed. Instead, I stood there, letting the silence fill the room like smoke. I remembered a time when this place smelled of cinnamon bread and old perfume, when my mother's slippers shuffled across these floors, and no one dared raise their voice at her. Now she was a ghost in her own home. "I'm going to make tea," I said quietly. In the kitchen, I searched the cabinets. Most were filled with Vera's things, labeled jars, supplements, imported teas with names I couldn't pronounce. I finally found the chamomile in the back, shoved behind detox powders. As the kettle boiled, I stared out the window. She didn't knock. My mother, out in the cold, probably didn't even try to come back in. She probably just sat, waiting, because someone told her she'd crossed a line she didn't even know existed. When I brought the tea back, she smiled weakly. "Don't make this bigger than it is," she murmured. "Vera's stressed. She's got work, the boys, the house to manage. I'm just in the way sometimes." "You're not in the way," I said. My hands were shaking. But she didn't reply. Later that night, when Vera had retreated upstairs and Alaric still hadn't come home, I sat alone in the kitchen. My mother had fallen asleep on the couch, curled under a blanket that wasn't hers, in a house she no longer controlled. I didn't touch the dinner Vera had left out for herself and Alaric. I couldn't. Instead, I stared at the door. The same one my mother sat in front of for God knows how long. She didn't even knock to let her back in. And I realized it wasn't the first time. That night wasn't some isolated, out-of-character moment. It was a glimpse into a slow erosion that had been happening for months, maybe years, while I was too caught up in boardrooms and brokerage reports to notice. I stayed up late, listening to the rhythm of the refrigerator humming, the occasional floorboard creaking upstairs, and my mother's steady breathing from the couch. The same couch she now called her bed. The morning after I arrived, I woke before sunrise. The light hadn't broken through the windows yet, but the house had its own language. Soft clicks of the heating system kicking in, faint footsteps above me. I moved quietly through the hallway, careful not to wake anyone. But I wasn't looking for coffee or comfort. I was looking for proof. She was still there, my mother. Curled like a child on the living room couch, wrapped in the throw blanket I gave her the night before. Her hands were tucked beneath her chin, her legs drawn close like she was trying to take up less space. There was a second pillow under her head, lopsided and clearly not meant for sleep, a decorative piece. I stood still for a moment, just watching her breathe. Then I walked past the living room, down the hallway that used to lead to her bedroom. What used to be her space was now sealed behind a door that had been painted a dull beige, no nameplate, no indication it ever held anything personal. I turned the knob slowly. It wasn't locked. The air hit me first, dusty, stale. The room was packed with labeled boxes stacked wall to wall. Christmas, dining room, winter decor, fall table settings. An artificial tree leaned against the wall, its base missing. A folded treadmill sat awkwardly in the corner. And in the back, barely visible behind a stack of Vera's beach totes, was my mother's old sewing machine, still threaded. On the floor, 3 frames lay face down. I picked one up. It was a photo of her and Dad at the housewarming party back in '87. The other 2 were baby pictures, mine and Maylee's. Not a scratch on them, just discarded. "Where does she keep her clothes?" I asked aloud, knowing no one was there to answer. Her dresser was gone, so was the mirror. No closet space for her coats or shoes. By the time I returned to the kitchen, the sky outside had turned pale blue. The coffee pot was already brewing. Vera stood barefoot by the island, sipping from a mug that read Mom Fuel. "You're up early," she said without turning. "I could say the same," I replied. She gave me a quick glance. "Didn't sleep well?" I didn't respond. She added, almost with a smirk, "Mom likes the couch. It's easier on her back." She says it herself all the time. Did she say that before or after you filled her bedroom with storage bins? Vera blinked, then turned away. She offered it up when we needed space. It was her idea. Of course it was. She says the fireplace helps with her arthritis, she added casually. I didn't argue, not because I agreed, because arguing with someone like Vera was like playing chess against someone who moved pieces when you weren't looking. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee and waited. And waited. That night, after dinner, everyone scattered. Alaric had gone to bed early, complaining about a migraine. Vera retreated to the upstairs den to finish a virtual yoga class. I stayed downstairs, pretending to watch TV. Around 1:45 a.m., I noticed a light flicker in the kitchen. It was faint, like someone had opened the fridge and tried not to make noise. I got up and walked toward the sound, keeping my steps quiet. There she was, my mother, in her robe, barefoot, standing in front of the open fridge. She held a small pot in her hand, the rice from earlier. No plate, no utensils, just a spoon and the pot. She didn't see me right away. Her back was to me. She was hunched a little, like she was hiding from being caught doing something wrong. "Mom," I said softly. She startled, turned slightly, but didn't drop the pot. "I thought you were asleep," she whispered. "I could say the same," I said gently. She smiled faintly. "I wasn't hungry earlier, but I figured, might as well eat something." "Let me heat it for you." She stepped back. No, don't make noise. Vera doesn't like food smells late at night, and I didn't ask if I could take this." "Mom, it's rice." She shrugged, like that meant nothing. "It's hers. I didn't want to waste it." I walked over, placed my hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to sneak food in your own home." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw a glimmer of something. Shame? Defeat? I couldn't tell. She didn't say anything, just took a bite, slow and small. I pulled out a chair and sat at the kitchen table. She joined me, still holding the pot in her lap. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. After a while, I stood and went to the cabinet to grab her favorite teacup, the one with violets painted along the rim. I opened the door and froze. There were jars everywhere, glass containers labeled Vera's, Do Not Touch, Meal Plan, Supplement Set A. Nothing looked like it belonged to a shared home. Everything was divided, marked, owned. There was no Eleanor's, not even an unlabeled shelf. I closed the cabinet door quietly and caught my reflection in the glass panel. This isn't her home anymore. Mom gave this house to you, and now she sleeps on a couch? I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I just laid the deed on the counter and looked Alaric in the eye. He blinked, like someone waking from a nap he didn't know he took. "It's not like that." I didn't respond. I just waited. He ran his fingers along the edge of his coffee mug. "She wanted to do it, said she didn't want to deal with taxes or paperwork, said it was better for us." I leaned on the island, my knuckles white. "She signed it out of love, and you signed her out of her own home." He didn't say anything to that. Just looked away, toward the window, like the backyard had suddenly become very interesting. I didn't push further. I was too tired, and the facts were already loud enough. Earlier that morning, I'd climbed into the attic, quietly, before anyone else had gotten up. I knew that if I confronted Alaric without proof, he'd deflect, spin, act like I misunderstood. But there it was. A dented blue plastic tub buried under a mess of fake pumpkins and tangled string lights. Inside, nestled between old tax forms and brittle receipts, was a manila folder with property scribbled on the tab in my mother's handwriting. The first paper dated back to 1987, Eleanor Maeve, sole owner. The second, a notarized transfer from 2015, signing full ownership over to my brother, Alaric Vaughn. I sat there for a moment on the attic floor, my hands frozen. It wasn't just a name on a document. It was a timeline, a turning point, a quiet betrayal disguised as logistics. When I brought it downstairs, Eleanor was folding towels in the laundry room. She didn't flinch when I showed her the papers, didn't gasp, didn't cry. "I remember," she said, like I'd asked what time the mail came. "Why did you do it?" She paused, folded another towel. "He had a family, a wife, the boys. I thought it would make things simpler, and I was tired, Bree. I didn't want to argue. I thought, if I stepped aside, they'd let me stay." They didn't. "I know," she said, and for a second her voice cracked. "But it's still his house now. I gave it to him. What right do I have to complain?" I wanted to scream. Instead, I picked up the towels she had folded and set them aside. "You have every right," I whispered. "You built this place." She smiled sadly. "I built it for you all." That sentence stayed with me for the rest of the day. I took a walk just to clear my head. Rochester was quiet that afternoon. sun breaking through the clouds for the first time in days. I passed the corner diner where we used to go after church, the bakery where Mom would pick up pies on holidays, places that held meaning, even if time had softened the edges, and all I could think was, my mother used to be someone here. She worked nights when we were little, mending clothes for half the neighborhood. I remembered waking up to the sound of her sewing machine humming from the living room, even at 2 a.m. She never complained, not when Dad got sick, not when the hospital bills came, not when Alaric's tuition drained her savings. She just kept going, and now she tiptoed around her own kitchen, afraid to use the microwave. Later that evening, I found myself standing in the hallway, staring at the space where a photo used to hang, our old family portrait. It had always been there, us in front of the house, Mom holding the keys, beaming like she'd won a marathon. I checked the closets, the drawers. It wasn't anywhere. Then I opened the study. Behind a stack of books, dusty and forgotten, was the frame. Face down. The glass cracked across Mom's face, a picture meant to honor her now buried behind outdated magazines. I picked it up, cleaned the glass with my sleeve, stared at her smile, the way her eyes lit up, the keys held proudly in her hand. The same house that now treated her like a guest, at best. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a case of neglect. It was a system reset. Mom wasn't ousted overnight. It happened slowly, piece by piece. Her name off the mailbox, her room repurposed, her recipes no longer cooked, her presence quieted. She didn't lose this house in one moment. She gave it away in fragments. And we let her. I walked back to the kitchen where Alaric was sipping his third cup of coffee like it would fix something. I placed the photo next to the deed. She used to own this place. He said nothing. She doesn't even have a shelf in the fridge now. Still nothing. I know what this is, I said, my voice finally steady. It's not about rice. It's not about rules. It's about rewriting history while she's still alive. He looked up then. Brielle. No. Don't do that thing where you act like you didn't notice. You're the one who told me once that love is in the details. You remember? How you said Dad showed love by fixing things before anyone asked. He nodded slowly. Well, then tell me what kind of love sends their mother outside in the cold and doesn't even look up from the couch? His mouth opened, closed. I didn't wait for a response. I picked up the documents and walked out of the room, leaving him sitting at the counter with nothing but a coffee cup and the weight of what he'd signed away. Alaric didn't say a word, but Vera did. She walked into the kitchen like nothing happened, flipping her hair over one shoulder and glancing down at the deed I'd just laid out. Her lips curled into a casual, dismissive smile. It was easier this way, she said, like she was commenting on what kind of milk she put in her coffee. Less paperwork. Besides, she always said she didn't need much. I stared at her, heart thudding in my chest. Not needing much doesn't mean deserving nothing. Alaric stayed silent, his eyes locked on the countertop like it held some moral clarity he couldn't find in himself. The tension in the room was thick, but Vera didn't even blink. She poured herself a glass of water from the fridge and walked out without another word. The rest of the morning passed in that same eerie silence, only broken by the occasional sound of Eleanor shuffling around in her slippers, wiping the already clean countertops, folding dish rags that didn't need folding. She didn't ask about what happened. She never did, and I didn't offer, because part of me already knew it wouldn't change a thing. Not today. Later that afternoon, I was sitting on the back porch with my laptop, trying to distract myself with some client emails, when Vera's voice carried from the dining room. She was on a call, and as usual, she spoke loud enough to be heard by neighbors 2 blocks over. No, it's going to be amazing, she said, laughing. We're hosting it here this year. Yeah, spring reunion. My mom's flying in, even bringing her new dog. It's gonna be huge. I paused. Her mom was coming. Yup, about 40 guests. The whole family. I'm thinking a pastel theme. I've already called the caterer. 40 guests. I set my laptop aside and stood slowly, walking into the house. She was still on the phone, now flipping through what looked like a printed itinerary. When she hung up, I asked, "You're planning a family reunion?" She didn't even look surprised. Yeah, Alaric and I were going to mention it later. And Mom? She blinked once, then leaned back into the chair like I was being dramatic. She hates crowds. You know that. It's just easier if she stays upstairs that day. Or maybe Malis can take her out. A day at the Arboretum, something quiet. I said nothing. Not yet. Later that evening, while setting the table for dinner, I noticed the stack of papers Vera had been reviewing earlier sitting on the sideboard. I picked them up casually. It was the finalized guest list. 40 names. Cousins, old neighbors, college friends, Vera's mother, even her Pilates instructor. But not Eleanor Maeve, not the woman whose name used to be on the title of this house, not the one who still cooked half the meals here, cleaned up after people she didn't raise, and tiptoed around her own life. I walked into the living room and handed the list to Alaric. You forgot someone. He looked down, then up at me. She didn't want to come, he said, not even sounding sure of himself. She wasn't invited. That's not fair. What isn't? He opened his mouth to respond, but Vera cut in from the hallway. Can we not do this right now? It's one dinner. She'd be overwhelmed. She used to host these, I said. She made those pies everyone loved. She sewed your table runners, Vera. She babysat your kids while you were out playing entrepreneur. And now she's too much? Don't twist this, Brielle. You've been here, 3 days? You don't know how things are. I know enough to see exactly how things are. The table went quiet. Moments later, Eleanor appeared at the kitchen doorway, holding a stack of linens. I walked toward her. Were you going to tell me you weren't invited? She gave a small smile, one of those tired, polite expressions she reserved for when she didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings. I didn't want to make things complicated. It's just one dinner. It's not just one dinner, I said, voice hard. It's every time they act like you're a burden. Every time they plan something around you instead of with you. She reached out and touched my hand. It's okay, honey. Let it go. No, I said. Because I remember when this house was full of life. You made it that way. And now they treat you like wallpaper. Alaric stood slowly. Let's not make this a scene. My eyes snapped to him. A scene was already made. The moment you erased her name from this family. I walked over to the sideboard, grabbed the guest list, and without a word, ripped it straight down the middle. Then again, and again. Vera gasped. What the hell do you think you're doing? Fixing the math, I said, tossing the shreds into the trash bin. Silence. Eleanor had moved to the couch by then, folding linens that had already been folded. Her hands moved methodically, like muscle memory. Her face was calm, but her eyes? They looked tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. If this house has no room for the woman who built it, I said, voice low but deliberate, then maybe it's not a home at all. That was my warning, and they didn't listen. Not that I expected much. Vera had always been the kind of person who believed in consequences, just not for herself. Alaric, on the other hand, was skilled at disappearing behind a cloud of silence. But me, I had seen enough. The next morning, after another night of my mother sleeping curled up on the couch with her knees tucked close like she was trying to protect whatever was left of her dignity, I climbed into the attic. The air was musty, filled with insulation dust and forgotten holiday wreaths, but I wasn't there to reorganize boxes. I had remembered something, an old tech project Alaric once started but never finished. Years ago, he'd set up a cheap, no-subscription home security system, one of those DIY kits he bought on impulse. He'd installed a few cameras in the hallway and above the porch. I wasn't sure if they were still working, but I was about to find out. I rummaged through bins until I found the small, white hub device. It was half buried under a tangle of extension cords. I plugged it into an outlet near the attic's crawl space, connected it to my phone via a dusty cable, and waited. To my surprise, the feed loaded. Old footage began to flicker. Low resolution, grainy black and white, but clear enough. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, watching clip after clip. The timestamps read like a calendar of casual cruelty. In one, my mother wiped down the kitchen counters in silence while Vera entertained friends in the dining room, her laughter echoing over the sound of my mother drying dishes. No one acknowledged her. In another, my mother stood at the front door, outside, waiting. Her shawl clutched tightly, her head turned toward the windows. 7 minutes. 7 whole minutes before the door finally opened, and it wasn't even Vera who let her in. It was one of the kids, who looked confused and half asleep. Another showed her sitting alone at the kitchen table, a plate of rice in front of her, while everyone else had finished and gone upstairs. The kind of things that, if you saw them once, you'd call them small, harmless, a misunderstanding. But not when they stack like this. Not when the pattern is so consistent, so quietly cruel. You can't look away. Around noon, while I was still combing through footage, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Celeste Truitt, our longtime neighbor, standing there in a cardigan, holding a phone awkwardly in both hands. "I wasn't sure if I should say anything," she began. I stepped aside to let her in. She sat down at the edge of the armchair like she wasn't sure she belonged there. "I saw your mother outside, the day you came back. She was sitting on the steps. She looked so cold. I didn't know what to do, but I recorded it, just in case." She opened her phone and hit play. There was my mother, knees pulled up, arms crossed, lips moving slowly, mouthing a prayer, or maybe just trying to stay awake. She looked so small, so tired. She knocked once, then again, weaker. And no one came. I swallowed the heat rising in my throat. "Thank you for showing me." She nodded, eyes glassy. "I thought someone should know." That night, after everyone had eaten and drifted into their separate corners of the house, I sat on the couch with that video playing on repeat. I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't touch my dinner. I didn't even ask my mother how she was, because I knew, and there were no words left for that kind of knowing. I uploaded the video anonymously. No names, no locations. Just the footage and a short caption. This is what a beloved family member looks like in some households. By the time I woke up the next morning, it had over 40,000 views. The comments poured in. "My mom went through this too. I wish I had caught it sooner. This breaks my heart. Thank you for sharing this. Elder abuse isn't just bruises. It's this." Some recognized the neighborhood. A few even hinted at knowing exactly who was in the clip, but I ignored those. The point wasn't to destroy Vera or shame Alaric. The point was to show the truth, and the truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it shivers silently on a concrete step while no one opens the door. That evening at dinner, I sat down with them. Vera had cooked chicken and rice, like irony was part of the menu. She plated everyone's dishes before sitting. My mother waited for the last plate, as usual, even though there was no reason for it. She didn't protest. As we began eating, I looked directly at Vera, then Alaric. "I've seen enough." Vera barely paused, her fork mid-air. "Seen what, exactly?" "The footage, the clips, the patterns." Alaric set down his glass. "Brielle." I cut him off. "Don't. Just don't." Vera leaned back. "If this is about that silly camera system, we've all forgotten it existed." "That's the problem," I said. "You forget too easily. Things that matter to other people, you dismiss them like clutter." My mother's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. I pushed away my plate. "If either of you try to deny this, to twist it or cover it up, just know, the world has already seen what you've hidden. You don't get to control the narrative anymore." Vera let out a dry laugh. "You think a blurry video is proof of something? You don't live here. You don't see the full picture." Alaric shifted in his seat, looking down. I stood slowly, placed my napkin beside my untouched plate, and said quietly, "This house is not what you think it is anymore." I paused, locking eyes with Vera one last time. "And neither am I." The house was shifting, and so was everything else. That evening, while Vera and Alaric finished dinner in the dining room, talking about their weekend plans like nothing was unraveling around them, I stepped outside and stood beneath the porch light. Snow was beginning to fall, soft and slow. I took out my phone and sent a single text. "I need to see you, tonight." Melis responded a minute later. "Come over." By the time I arrived at her apartment across town, the snow had picked up. She opened the door wearing flannel and fuzzy socks, hair pulled back, the smell of cinnamon tea drifting out from the kitchen. I hadn't seen her since Dad's funeral, not in any real sense. We'd exchanged messages, birthday calls, but never this. I sat down on the couch, pulled the deed papers from my bag, and slid them across the coffee table. She didn't speak at first, just read, then reread, then looked up at me with that same old fire that used to show up when someone dared to talk back to our mother at PTA meetings. She gave him the whole house, Malis whispered. And now they're treating her like some freeloader? They treat her like excess. Her lips tightened. She raised us, fed us, gave everything. You're right. It's time. We didn't need a long speech. There was no dramatic scene or rallying cry, just a deep, shared silence between two daughters who had watched enough. The next morning, we sat across from a property attorney in a small office near the courthouse. It was snowing again. Rochester felt frozen in place, but I wasn't, not anymore. The attorney, a woman named Terry with sharp glasses and a sharper memory, pulled out a file and said, "Each of you owns a third of the property. If you want out, you're legally entitled to sell your share." "And if the third sibling doesn't want to sell?" I asked. Terry smiled. "That's his problem, not yours." 2 hours later, the paperwork was in motion. We didn't sell it to some nice couple looking for a starter home. We sold it to a real estate investor who moved quickly, paid in full, and wasn't known for negotiating with people who overstayed their welcome. 2 days after that, a formal envelope was delivered to the house. Vera opened it first. I was at the kitchen table, eating toast. She stormed in, waving the notice like it was a death sentence. "What the hell is this?" I didn't look up. She slammed the letter down in front of me. "You sold the house? Without telling us?" Alaric walked in a moment later, glanced at the paper, and went pale, his voice cracked. "They can't do this. This house is not yours," I finished. "You think you're clever?" Vera hissed. "This is war." I finally met her eyes. "No. And this is the cost of peace you refuse to give." She opened her mouth, probably to launch another list of grievances, but Alaric interrupted. "What does this mean for us? What happens now?" I stood, folded the letter, and handed it back. "It means you'll need to negotiate with the new owner if you want to stay. Otherwise, you'll be packing." Later that night, I sat in the hallway outside Mom's bedroom, if you could still call it that. She had turned it into a quiet nest of folded blankets and books, a small lamp by her side, and a space heater that buzzed softly. She looked up from her knitting. "Everything okay?" I nodded. "It will be." She didn't ask questions. She never did. But her eyes lingered on mine a second longer than usual. There was something like recognition there, like she knew I had crossed a line on her behalf and wasn't coming back. The official notice was posted the following morning. Vera tore it off the door and tossed it into the trash, but she knew it was real. She spent most of the afternoon on the phone, pacing back and forth, voice rising and falling with fake pleasantries. She'd always been good at sounding composed until she wasn't. By dusk, she slammed her office door and disappeared upstairs. Alaric, meanwhile, wandered around like a man who had woken up in someone else's nightmare. He barely looked at Mom, barely looked at me. That evening, as the snow piled up outside, Vera barged into my room without knocking. "You think you've won something?" she snapped. "I didn't win," I replied. "But I stopped losing. This was my house, my home." "No," I said calmly. "It was hers. You just stayed in it long enough to forget." She shook her head, laughed bitterly. "You're going to regret this. When the dust settles, when this all falls apart, don't come crying to me. I never did before." She opened her mouth again, but there was nothing left to say. That night, I stood at the kitchen window, watching the streetlight flicker outside. Snowflakes danced against the glass like tiny truths that wouldn't settle. Mom stood beside me, holding a cup of warm milk, her hands steady. "This doesn't feel like winning," she said softly. "It's not," I whispered back. "But it's something." She leaned against the counter, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't look over her shoulder. The house was shifting, and so was everything else. And when they realized they were losing, they chose war. Not a loud war, not one with fists or screaming matches. No, Vera's wars came dressed in curated Instagram captions and perfectly staged stories that made her look like the innocent wife fighting to save her family from the greedy, bitter sister-in-law who had overstepped. By morning, her social media was filled with thinly veiled jabs, photos of the boys looking sad at the dinner table. A quote that read, "Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who turn their back when you need them most." She never used my name. She didn't have to. The comments section made it clear who the villain was supposed to be. "She's trying to play martyr," Mayless texted after reading a thread someone forwarded to her. "Let her," I replied. We didn't engage, not online, not in person. Silence, I'd learned, made people more nervous than shouting, and Vera hated silence because she couldn't control it. 2 days later, the doorbell rang just after breakfast. I was still in my robe, sipping tea in the kitchen with Mom. The boys were upstairs. Alaric was on a call. Vera was nowhere to be seen. Through the window, I saw a man in a long gray coat holding a clipboard and a thick envelope. I opened the door. "Brielle Maeve?" "Yes. I'm here to deliver official notice on behalf of Halberton Investments, the new majority stakeholders in this property." I nodded. "You can give it to me." He handed over the envelope, tipped his head respectfully, and left. I didn't read it right away. I waited until we were all in the kitchen. Alaric hung up his call and walked in. Vera followed, arms crossed. Mom sat quietly by the window, hands wrapped around her mug. I placed the envelope on the table and slid it forward. Vera tore it open like it was a bill. Her face twisted as she read the contents. "They're giving us 7 days. 7 days to either buy out the remaining shares or vacate. This is insane." She looked at me like I'd committed some act of treason. "This house is ours." "No, Vera," I said calmly. "It's not. Not legally, not morally, not anymore." Alaric picked up the letter, eyes scanning the page. His shoulders sank. "They can't make us leave," Vera hissed. "We have rights." "You have a third," I reminded them. "We sold 2/3. The law is clear." "That doesn't give you the right to destroy your family," she snapped. "You did that all on your own," I replied. She turned on Mom, who had said nothing through the entire exchange. "You want to see her happy?" she spat. "Go find her a nursing home." I stood. "Don't talk to her like that. She doesn't even want to be here. She just sits around, eats our food, takes up space." I moved between them, blocking her line of sight. "You're not angry at her. You're angry that you're being held accountable, for once." Vera stormed out. Alaric stayed, eyes still on the letter. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside to get some air. Snow had melted slightly, leaving patches of slush along the sidewalk. Celeste, our neighbor, waved from across her yard. "Hey," she called, walking over with a bag of salt in one hand. "Mind if I say something?" "Go ahead." She hesitated. "I've been meaning to say this for a while. I hope it doesn't come off wrong." I braced myself. "I always thought your mom was their maid." The words hung there, suspended in the cold air. "She was always out back cleaning, raking leaves, watering plants no one else touched. She never spoke much, just smiled and went back to it. I just assumed." I nodded, jaw tight. "She's not," I said. "She's the woman who bought this house." Celeste looked horrified. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean—" "It's okay," I interrupted. Though it wasn't. That night, as I stood in the hallway, I looked around at everything that had once been hers, the walls she painted, the floors she scrubbed. How loud must someone cry before the world calls it pain? I stepped into the living room where Mom was knitting. She looked up, sensing the heaviness on my face. "Don't fight for me," she said. "I'm old." "You're not old," I replied. "You're eternal, and I'm not fighting. I'm restoring." She smiled, a little. "You always were the stubborn one. I learned from the best." That evening, as I was closing the windows, Vera burst into the kitchen. In her hand was another letter, one from the legal office. The final notice. "This is harassment," she shouted. "We've lived here for over a decade." "It's called eviction," I said. "And it's legal." She ripped the letter in half. "You'll regret this." I leaned against the counter, steady. "Not as much as you'll regret underestimating me." "This one won't come off the wall." I said it aloud, even though no one was in the room with me, just the soft ticking of the kitchen clock and the low hum of the heater keeping the cold at bay. I stood in our new living room, holding the old family photo, the one with Mom in the center, keys in hand, her smile brighter than the sun that day. The glass was no longer cracked. I had it restored at a small frame shop 2 towns over. Malis walked in carrying a box of winter scarves. "You sure you want to put that one there?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. We hung it together, right above the mantel. It wasn't about nostalgia. It was about placement. It was about dignity. The week leading up to the move had unfolded like a slow exhale. Vera packed with the energy of a woman betrayed by the world, slamming boxes, cursing under her breath. The boys, confused and quiet, stayed in their room most of the time. Alaric didn't do much. He moved mechanically, saying little, often caught staring into space like he was waiting for someone to wake him up from this. It snowed the morning they left, fitting in a way. The whole yard was covered in white, like the house itself was erasing what it didn't want to remember. Vera carried out the last box herself. She didn't say goodbye. Alaric stood by the moving truck for a moment longer. He looked at me as if he wanted to say something. Maybe sorry, maybe nothing. In the end, he just nodded and climbed into the passenger seat. And just like that, the house was quiet again. Eleanor sat on the front porch with a cup of tea in her hands. She wore the same knitted shawl she had that night I found her outside, but now she wore it with pride, not shame. She watched the truck disappear down the road, then looked up at the sky. "I didn't need revenge," she said, so softly I barely heard it. "I just needed the silence to end." I stood beside her, hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Do you feel like it has?" She took a long sip of her tea. "Almost." That evening, the house looked different, lighter, like a window had finally opened. Malis brought in her plants from the apartment. I lit a candle that smelled like lemon and basil. Eleanor moved into the bedroom she once gave away, now repainted in soft blues and greens. She placed a single photo of her and Dad on the nightstand. The next day, we met with the news crew. It wasn't my idea. Celeste had reached out to a local reporter she knew, someone working on a segment about elder care and family displacement. When she asked if we wanted to speak, I asked Mom first. "I'm not looking to start drama," she said, shaking her head. "This isn't drama, Mom. This is truth." She paused, then said, "Okay." We didn't name names. We didn't point fingers. We told the truth. The reporter, a young woman named Jamie with a kind smile, sat in our living room and asked gentle questions. Malis spoke about growing up in a house where warmth came from more than the heating vents. I talked about how easy it is to get so caught up in life that you miss the slow disappearance of someone's dignity. And then Mom spoke. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. Her voice was calm, but firm. "This house had love," she began. "Then it had rules. Then it had silence. I lived through all 3. Now I choose none." The segment aired 2 nights later. It wasn't sensationalized, just honest, and it hit harder than we expected. The station's website crashed for an hour from the surge in traffic. Viewers called in, commented, shared their own stories. A woman in Missouri sent an email saying, "That interview saved my relationship with my mother." And then came the fallout. Vera's curated life began to collapse. First, one of her brand partnerships paused their contract, citing concerns about alignment with values. Then her influencer group removed her from their leadership board. She tried to control the narrative, made a few posts, hinted that the media twisted things, but it didn't work, not this time. Truth, once seen, can't be unseen. As for Alaric, he stayed off social media altogether. I heard he moved into a small rental on the other side of town. We haven't spoken since. I don't know if we will again, but I think about him sometimes. About how someone who used to hold my hand when we crossed the street now can't look me in the eye. On the 3rd day after the broadcast, I signed the final release papers. The house, the one we'd grown up in, the one we fought over, cried in, broke apart, and rebuilt, was now under new ownership. No one in our family could claim it anymore. It was done. We left a note for the new owners, tucked into the kitchen drawer. Take care of her. This house carried a lot of stories, some hard, some beautiful. May yours be the latter. That night, in our new home, I passed by the living room and saw Eleanor standing in front of the photo on the wall. She touched the edge of the frame, as if testing whether it was really there. It's not going anywhere, I said. She turned to me, her eyes wet, but not from sorrow. This one won't come off the wall. But not all cracks can be fixed with glue. There are fractures too fine for anyone else to notice, except the one who carries them. Like the way Mom still pauses before opening the fridge as if someone might scold her, or how she never asks for the last piece of anything, even if no one else wants it. Some wounds don't bleed, they echo. A few days after we settled into the new house, I began unpacking the last box from Mom's kitchen, her recipe books, notes, handwritten grocery lists. The same little spiral-bound notepad she'd kept since I was a child was tucked between the pages of an old cake recipe. I flipped through it absent-mindedly, notes about sugar substitutes, reminders about dentist appointments, a scribbled "Ask Malis" about her birthday cake, wedged between tomato soup instructions. And then I found it. A worn envelope, sealed, with my name on the front. I opened it slowly, sensing what it might contain before I even read the first line. If I disappear one day, it's not because I didn't love you. I just couldn't be invisible any longer. My hands trembled as I kept reading. There were days I stood in that house and wondered what I had done wrong, how love turned into permission to be erased. I stayed quiet because I thought I was protecting you, all of you. But I realize now, silence doesn't protect, it hides, and I was tired of hiding. If I leave, it's not to hurt you. It's to remember who I was before I became furniture in a home I paid for. The ink was smudged on one edge. A water stain? A tear? I found Mom in the backyard, sitting beneath the maple tree with a book in her lap. Malis was nearby, tending to a small patch of lilies they'd planted together earlier in the week. I sat beside her and handed her the letter. She didn't ask what it was. She took it, folded it closed again without reading it, and placed it on the armrest. I wrote that a while back, she said quietly. Why didn't you send it? I did, she replied. In my head. 100 times. I nodded, biting the inside of my cheek. When? She looked down at her hands. After Vera told me I was lucky not to be homeless, that I should be grateful to have a roof at all. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. You shouldn't have had to hear that. Not from her. Not in that house. She wasn't the first, Mom said, but she was the one who made me believe it. After a pause, she added, There's something else I should have told you sooner. She looked at me like she expected me to break. I had a savings account. One I started after your father passed. It wasn't much, but it was something. I meant it for all three of you. I told Alaric when he was struggling. He said he just needed a little to cover some bills, but he emptied it. Never brought it up again. I didn't flinch. Somehow I already knew. I asked him once, gently, she continued. He told me it must have been a bank error. We sat in silence, only the rustle of tree branches above us. Do you want me to talk to him? I asked. No, she replied. That part of my life is over. The next morning, I drove to a little cafe near downtown, where Alaric now worked freelance from his laptop. I didn't text ahead. He looked surprised when I slid into the booth across from him. He looked smaller, like the edges of him had faded since we last spoke. I didn't expect you, he said. I'm not here to argue. He looked at the envelope I pulled from my purse. Inside were the spare keys to Mom's old house, the ones she used to keep in her junk drawer for emergencies. I placed them on the table. This is closure, I said, not an invitation. He nodded, didn't touch the envelope. How is she? She smiles more, I said. But her eyes still look tired sometimes. He looked down. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I know. But knowing isn't the same as changing. I left before he could say more. Back at home, Mom was watering the new herb garden with Malis. They had turned the side yard into a patchwork of green, basil, mint, rosemary. The same hands that once shook from holding disappointment now moved with quiet purpose, grounding each seed with care. Watching them, I realized something simple and enormous. This wasn't a victory, it was a beginning. This wasn't about getting even. It was about rebuilding what was quietly stolen, her sense of place, her right to be seen, her ability to laugh without apology. People had started reaching out after the broadcast. Cards arrived in the mail from strangers. Phone calls came from folks in the community who hadn't seen Eleanor smile in years. A women's circle from the library asked her to speak at their spring event. On dignity, they said. Because we need to hear it from someone who never should have had to ask for it back. She said yes. One evening, I found her writing something in a journal by the kitchen window. The light of dusk turned her hair silver blue, her glasses slipping down her nose. "What are you writing?" I asked. She looked up and smiled. "Just notes. For the speech. I'm not good with words like you girls are." "You don't need to be," I said. "You just need to be honest." She reached over and squeezed my hand. That night, after dinner, as the snow began to melt from the rooftops, she sat in the living room, legs tucked under her, sipping her usual tea. "You gave me my voice back," she said softly. I shook my head, smiling. "No, Mama. You just stopped giving it away." Some homes aren't broken by storms, but by silence. This story isn't just about inheritance or property. It's about what happens when we stop seeing the people who raised us, when comfort turns into control and love becomes a quiet erasure. Have you ever watched someone you love fade into the background just because they stopped fighting to be seen? Let us know in the comments how you think this should have ended. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful, real-life family stories that deserve to be heard.